I wanted to begin by asking you if any of you have seen the movie called Phenomenon with John Travolta. Remember that movie? In it, John Travolta's character plays, he tries everything he can to keep a rabbit out of his garden. So he builds a fence. He even goes down 3 feet down and buries his fence in. But still he notices that this pesky little rabbit is chewing up his vegetables. And he's just so beside himself, he can't figure out what to do. So one night he opens the gate to his garden and he sits in the dark on his porch to wait and see what happens. And to his amazement, what happens is the bunny rabbit leaves the garden. He had actually fenced in the rabbit instead of keeping it out, right? So the analogy to our topic today, forgiveness, is how often do we barricade and fence up our lives to protect ourselves against hurt and loss, thinking we're keeping the painful things out when they're already trapped deep inside of us, down in the roots of our being. So all we have to do is open the gate of forgiveness and let them go. Sounds easy peasy, doesn't it? So in the classes that I teach and facilitate, the topic of forgiveness occasionally comes up. And it's quickly kicked to the side. Our conversations around forgiveness are very brief. And when I've mentioned, maybe we need to do a study around forgiveness, I get the deer in the headlights look. Like no one wants to talk about forgiveness because it's difficult. But I think that every single one of us, if we are conscious, awake, and aware, we know that we have one or many people in our lives that we need to forgive, including our own selves, as the Daily Word said this morning. And we really don't want to look at that. I've discovered that there's a great amount of fear, which is why no one wants to talk about it, around forgiveness, the whole idea of forgiveness. And we may have neatly packed away our resentments and our anger and our bitterness into a backpack that we drag around behind us. And that backpack gets heavier and heavier and heavier, but we've forgotten about it. So we might say, hey, I'm good. Doesn't bother me anymore. I don't even think about that person or that incident. That might be called self-delusion. I don't know. That's not for me to say. You can diagnose yourself as we get further into this talk. Why do I say fear surrounds the idea of forgiveness? Because we might find it necessary to relive incidents. We might find it necessary to look at the hurt that was done to us. And the fear may be that we have to feel it again. Nobody wants to feel it again. How many of you have packed forgiveness down pretty darn deep? And you might even say, hey, I'm not aware of it. I don't think about it. I don't feel it. But it's there. If you haven't done a forgiveness work around it, it's still there, I promise you. My experience has been that full forgiveness is enough to free me. And isn't freedom what we want? Because we can't find peace. We can't find true love and true freedom without forgiveness. So that's happened for me. May it be so for you. This is what the meditation teacher Jack Kornfield says. Anger, blame, conflict, and resentment arise from our fear. And when we're afraid, our body tightens up, our heart is constricted, our mind is tied in knots, and we cannot live wisely. Would you agree with that statement? Yeah. Mm-hmm. When someone has hurt us, consciously or unconsciously, the act of forgiveness is one of the most difficult things we have to face in resolving the situation. Sometimes it feels like it's easier not to forgive and just cut that person out of our lives altogether. How many of you have done that? Cut people out of your lives altogether, right? It's the easiest, that's true. And in some cases, it may be the safest thing to do. Forgiveness does not mean that we have to condone behavior. It also does not mean we have to do a reconciliation The forgiveness is for us. It's not for the thems, all the thems out there. If we harbor bitterness, we only hurt ourselves because we're the one harboring the bitterness, and bitterness poisons us. M. McCourt says, resentment's like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And that's what the Daily Word said this morning, right? Not those exact same words, but yeah, resentment is like taking poison and expecting the person that you're mad at to die. And so I've never actually considered taking poison or offering it to the one who hurt me. The analogy is clear, though. By carrying around that heavy backpack of resentment and bitterness and anger, oh my, resentment and bitterness and anger, oh my, right? I'm the only one who suffers. The other guy is usually clueless and they're living their life with no thought to the offense. We may be suffering terribly from things that happened in the past, while those who betrayed us are on vacation. They don't know it, they're clueless, they don't care. They're unaware that they've hurt us. So this forgiveness again is for who? Us. So as I've mentioned before, and most probably will again, when I'm guided to bring a talk to you, I have to live out the talk the week before. In this case, it hasn't necessarily been just this past week, because forgiveness work is something that I do on a daily basis, nearly every day anyway. But there are times currently, and certainly there are past events that have caused me to bring particular scenarios to the divine, to the source of all love. For me personally, it took many, many years to be free of the hurt and the anger, and more hurt and anger I felt toward my mother. It took a long time because I had a very tall layer cake filled with anger, resentment, bitterness, anger, resentment, bitterness. It was also a heavy backpack, and I drug it around with me for a long, long time. And whenever I thought about her and what she had done or not done, just the way she was in the world, added more layers of anger. Even if it wasn't directed to me, I still was angry with her because of the way she was. Does that make any sense to you guys? Oh, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Because I don't like to be the only one suffering up here. So my backpack became heavier and heavier and heavier. And after a time, I learned that peeling that particular onion had hundreds of layers to it. Not just like 6 or 8 that we have in a regular onion. This was an onion the size of this room, right? Yeah. So after I learned about the importance of forgiveness and was able to see her as a hurting individual who never knew true happiness or peace, I was able to apply what I learned to my own situation. I was able to think about her. I can think about her now with no energetic response whatsoever. I can talk to you about her, and I don't have to talk her down or tell you all these horrible stories. It's not necessary anymore. That energetic response has been removed. How many of you would like to have that energetic response removed? Yeah? Because when you have a huge lifelong resentment like that, it takes a while to get rid of it. So it wasn't a quick fix, but eventually I learned over a period of years that I was able to pretty much think about her and feel very sorry for her. She did not live a happy life. She did not have her family around her. When she died alone. Alone, with hospice people in the kitchen, and her dog wouldn't even come near her when she was passing. And that's sad. And I feel bad for her. But remember, hurting people hurt people. Say that with me. Hurting people hurt people. They just can't help it. And of course, I probably, like you, get my horns twisted pretty easily by ordinary things that people say and do. Do you guys? Do you get your horns twisted? Oh, come on. Raise your hands. Thank you. Everybody gets their horns twisted. My very closest relationships remind me of an ongoing forgiveness work that I try to attend to every day. What I do know for sure is that the closer I abide to Spirit, the less time I need to spend forgiving another person. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, says it like this: men and women, this is a quote, men, I threw in the and women, ought to always pray. Be instant in prayer. Be so saturated with the consciousness of the Spirit that our mind is attending the higher realms. Unquote. Thereby, forgiveness becomes a byproduct of breath. And so, if you are living in the higher realms, if your minds are connected to the higher level consciousness, every breath is an opportunity to forgive. Every breath is an opportunity to be grateful, isn't it? And gratitude is easier than forgiveness. But if you bring that in to your very breath, you will find you'll forgive more people, more situations, more incidences that come up in everyday life. Martin Luther King says, forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude, right? Just like the breath. It's constant. Every time we breathe in and exhale, we can think about those that we wish, that we desire to forgive. So what unforgiveness or holding a grudge does to us can be pretty devastating. It will imprison us in the past. Was I imprisoned in the past, thinking about my mother walking the dogs and saying, man, I should have said this. She's been dead for 20 years. I should have said this. I should have done that. Okay, that's me being imprisoned in the past. I don't do that anymore, thank you, God. But I'm just saying. We might, and do, bring anger, bitterness, and mistrust into new relationships, and it can negatively impact our current relationships. Unforgiveness is linked to higher incidences of stress, heart disease, high blood pressure, lowered immune response, anxiety, depression, and body pain. Plus, it puts us in a fight or flight mode. We might have unexpected bursts of anger. We might experience sleeplessness or insomnia. We might experience emotional numbness. And I have to say that I have myself experienced emotional numbness in the past. And I can there's a direct line from my emotional numbness to unforgiveness. And of course, we will experience little joy or little peace, and most importantly, no freedom. We will remain imprisoned. Like, forgiveness is super important, guys. Choosing to forgive is choosing to alleviate ourselves from that burden. Choosing to be free of the past. Anybody here want to be free from the past? The past might have just happened 2 hours ago. It might have happened when you walked through the doors, or it might have happened 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago, or 2 years ago. The past is right there. This is the now. Oops, it's in the past now too. So our bodies respond to forgiveness and release. We can forgive our way to healing, to prosperity, and to peace. So I'm going to read you a story that Jack Kornfield has in his book, The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace. Yes, I study multiple books before I bring my talks to you. It's a little long, and some of you may have actually heard this story before, and that's okay. You'll like it again. He starts out by saying, no matter how extreme the circumstances, a transformation of the heart is possible. Once on the train from Washington to Philadelphia, I found myself seated next to an African-American man who had worked for the State Department in India, but had quit to run a rehab program for juvenile offenders in the District of Columbia. Most of the youths he worked with were gang members who had committed homicide. One 14-year-old boy in his program had shot and killed an innocent teenager to prove himself to his gang. At the trial, the victim's mother sat impassively silent until the end, when the youth was convicted of the killing. After the verdict was announced, she stood up slowly and stared directly at him and said, "I'm going to kill you." Then the youth was taken away to serve several years in the juvenile facility. After the first half of the year, in other words, 6 months later, she went to visit her slain son's killer. He had been living on the streets before the killing, and she was the only visitor he'd ever had. For a time they talked, and when she left, she gave him money for cigarettes. Then she started, step by step, to visit him more regularly, bringing food and small gifts. Near the end of his 3-year sentence, she asked him what he would be doing when he got out. He was so confused and very uncertain. So she offered to set him up with a job at a friend's company. Then she inquired about where he would live. And since he had no family to return to, she offered him temporary use of a spare room in her house. For 8 months, he lived there, ate her food, and worked at the job. Then one evening, she called him into the living room to talk. She sat down opposite him and waited. Then she started. "Do you remember in the courtroom when I said I was going to kill you?" "I sure do," he replied. "Well, I did," she went on. "I did not want the boy who could kill my son for no reason to remain alive on this earth. I wanted him to die. That's why I started to visit you and bring you things. That's why I got you the job and let you live here in my house. That's how I set about changing you. And that old boy, he's gone. So now I want to ask you, since my son is gone and that killer is gone, if you'll stay here. I've got a room and I'd like to adopt you if you let me." Are you all getting chill bumps? And she became the mother of her son's killer, the mother he never had. That is forgiveness. Right? Sorry, I got caught up in the story. Finding a way to extend forgiveness to ourselves is another of our most essential tasks. Again, if we look closely at our life, we can see the sorrows and pain that have led to our own wrongdoing to others as well as to ourselves. In this, we can finally extend forgiveness to ourselves. Without this self-mercy and grace, we will live our own life in exile. We don't want to live in exile, do we? Do you like this with your heads? No. Here are some ways you might be able to pinpoint a lack of forgiveness within yourself. If you find lack of prosperity, if you find lack of creativity, if you find lack of peace in your relationships, if you lack forward movement in your spiritual life, if you lack good health. I was speaking at a church on the other coast a little while back, and I wasn't talking about forgiveness from the podium, but afterwards some people were talking to me about forgiveness. And this man came up and he said, "When I did complete forgiveness, I lost 60 pounds. Because that's what happens. Our lives, our bodies are changed." Who wants, not everybody here needs to lose 60 pounds, never mind. When we do not let go of unforgiveness, we cannot possibly be in the flow. It's impossible. The flow is blocked. We are blocked. And this is vital information, right? Because we don't want to be blocked, but when we fail to forgive, not only is prosperity and creativity and peace and greater health blocked, but what else is blocked? Joy, love, happiness, enthusiasm. It's all blocked if we're not in the flow. We don't get to pick and choose. When something is blocked, it's all blocked. Can you see that? Do you like this with your heads? When we fail to forgive, okay, I already said that. So blocked is blocked and everything's included. Forgiveness is the way we free ourselves from resentments of the past. And the past, as I said before, might be yesterday or 2 hours ago. Forgiveness can and will unleash the flow of goodness in our lives. Forgiveness will give us the strength to face the challenges and difficulties ahead of us. So the lesson here is when things aren't flowing, find out where you need to forgive.